I'm Paul Larson, and it's time to shine the spotlight on a retired teacher who lives in Saratoga Springs and still enjoys educating people about the traditions of the Native Americans we call Iroquois. Kay Olin no longer teaches using textbooks and lesson plans. She now educates with stories, historical tales, legends, and folk stories. Many of these she learned by spending summers on the Akwesasne territory with her Mohawk family. Olin has, all of her life, learned to integrate Mohawk traditions with her life in the community at large on Long Island and Saratoga Springs. She often tells her stories at large gatherings, such as the Iroquois Cultural Festival at the Fenimore Art Museum in Cooperstown, New York.
Long, long ago, there was a field, kind of like this. And in the middle of that field, there was one tree growing all by itself.
What kinds of stories do you enjoy telling?
I tell stories that come from the tradition of the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois. I like to tell them within a cultural context so that people know that they're not just stories, but that they are stories that have meaning and come from specific locale and from specific peoples.
How important is it to you to retain your identity as a Native American person with these traditions that are centuries old?
It's very important to me to remember from where I have come and from where my ancestors have come. And I feel fortunate to have been surrounded by people that could share that kind of knowledge with me, to share the stories with me, to share our history with me.
At the other end of the field, there was a vine. And that vine was crawling along the ground. There were no trees near it, so it couldn't climb up the tree. It was just making its way along the ground.
At Native American festivals, Mohawk storyteller Kay Olin enjoys sharing the cultural tales and history of Iroquois people with others.
And that vine started very slowly to make its way over toward that tree.
No stranger to public speaking, Olin taught elementary students in New York State for more than 30 years. She enjoyed sharing Native traditions with her young audiences too, and wanted to be sure they took away some important lessons. Teaching in public schools, what are some of the stereotypes about Native people that you've encountered, and how did you deal with them?
I think one of the problems that we have is that many people still speak of us in the past tense and don't realize that we're still here and that we know who we are and that we still have a strong cultural identity. So I encourage teachers to bring conversations about Native people up to the present. Talk about what happened in the past, but also talk about what's going on today and that we are still here. Another common stereotypes is that when people think about Native people, right away they envision teepees, tomahawks, and totem poles. And of course, not all of our people lived in teepees. Some people did, especially in the plains area. But for instance, the Native peoples that lived in this area lived in longhouses. And so we need to correct that stereotype. When people think about tomahawks, right away they think that we were always at war with other people and with each other. And that's not the case. There were times when there were conflicts. Some of them were small, some of them were big, but we weren't always in conflict with one another. We weren't always fighting. There were times when there was a great deal of sharing. Our networking systems ran far and wide. And totem poles belong to the people of the Northwest. And again, very often when people talk about us, they lump all of those traditions together rather than making distinctions. And so I encourage people when they're talking about Native people to define who it is that they're talking about at that time instead of lumping us all together. Because when you lump us all together, that's when you start stereotyping. That's when you start making generalizations that may not be accurate.
What's a traditional event on the Iroquois calendar that you find very important to observe?
We have ceremonies that go on throughout the year. When we have our ceremonies, we come together and we give thanks and express our appreciation and love for every part of the natural world. that's what our spirituality is all about. It's very simple. It's just about saying thank you and I love you, and showing our appreciation for the gift of life and all of the gifts that we have been given to sustain life. One of the ceremonies that I really try to make sure that I attend each year is what we call the Midwinter Ceremony. And I try to attend that so that not only can I express that gratitude, but also reconnect with family and with friends. But all of the ceremonies are important, and each one focuses on the giving of thanks for everything in the natural world.
And I said, oh no, what happened? Did the vine, did it strangle that tree? And he just smiled and he said, no, that tree lived. That tree survived because it had a strong root base.
Why are these stories important for you to tell?
It's important for me to share these stories because I think that one of the stereotypes that people have about us, that maybe young people have about Native peoples, is that we're kind of scary because they've heard us discussed in the context of war. And I think when they see me and they hear me sharing a story, that maybe counteracts some of that fear that young people especially might have about who we are. Also because very often we're spoken about in the past tense. They see me here today, alive, living in two worlds, my traditional world and in the greater community as well. And that I'm able to do that I'm able to balance that. And so I think they see me more as a human being, and that exemplifies the fact that all Native peoples are human, that we all have a sense of humor, that we all are still here today, and that even if we're dressed in our traditional attire or if we're dressed in jeans and sneakers, that we still know who we are, that we haven't forgotten from where we have come, that we remember our traditions and our culture, and that we're proud of our identity.
Mountain Lake PBS is producing the Native American artistry pieces in cooperation with the New York State Historical Association's Fenimore Art Museum in Cooperstown, New York. This project is also a partnership with the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services. Spotlight segments are funded in part by the Glenn and Carol Pearsall Adirondack Foundation, dedicated to improving the quality of life for year-round residents of the Adirondack Park.